Just waiting for some more. Judges chapter 19. Judges chapter 19. I'm going to try to get this thing right here in front of me so it picks me up the whole time. This mic is real sensitive, so sometimes if you talk quiet, it won't pick you up. So people think the mic's messed up, but it's actually just quiet talking. So I hope that I can talk loud enough where it constantly picks me up. Tonight I'm filling in for Ty, as it's obvious. He's not here, I'm here. But when he asked me to speak, I was thinking about what to do, and I was struggling with it. And so I thought, well, I'll do something themed around what's going on in the world. And so Halloween time, I actually have like some free movie tickets. Well, they're not free, I'm paying for them. I'm part of this movie club that I didn't know I had been paying monthly subscriptions for. And when I realized it, I've been doing that for months. And so I realized it, and so you get a free ticket every month when you pay for, not a free ticket, you pay for a monthly club and there's a ticket included. I've been paying for this ticket, let's put it that way. Anyway, so I figured it out. So I was like, we got to go use these tickets so I can cancel this club and get out of this thing. And but everything playing is like horror movies, like scary movies right now. It's that time of year. And Owen and Ruby, it doesn't work well for them, So we just haven't been able to find a good movie to take our family to go. But I'm going to talk about one tonight because we're going to find something. I thought, what's a scary Bible story? And it was easy, man. Just drop the Bible open. There's a lot of scary stories. And I was trying to decide which one to talk about. I thought about the one where the bears maul a bunch of kids. That'd be a scary story, Thought about the one where the dogs ate the lady till just her, the palms of her hands and the soles of her feet were left. That's a horror story, right? There's a lot of those. And I actually told Emily tonight, I said, do a kids' Bible hour tonight. Because I don't want my littlest ones in here listening to this story. Judges chapter 19. This is a rough one. This is if we made this into a movie, it would be during Halloween, and I wouldn't be taking my kids to see this story. It is one of the most gruesome horror stories you're going to read in the Bible. So we're going to go through it. The reason I picked it, honestly, is because it's probably the least well-known of the ones that I've mentioned and some of the others I was looking at. A lot of the other ones we're familiar with. This one, a lot of you may be like, I don't know that I've ever even heard that story. Or if I haven't heard much about it. So we're going to read some in the Old Testament. If you want to go to some parts of the Bible to read some scary times, go to Judges. I know right now in the world is a scary time. We were actually sitting there at lunch, and Stephanie, I was talking to her, and she's like, it's scary times right now, It's scary out there, and it is. I mean, we're probably about to go through some serious war and stuff like that. The world's getting involved, and it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And so we look at it, and there's a lot of people in the religious world today talking about, is this the end? Is this the signs for the end? And things like that. And, we don't aspire to that type of view, but it is a scary time in the world. And so I wanted to let you know it's been worse. This is not the worst it's been. Sometimes when it gets scary like this, we think, man, the world's the worst it's ever been. Not even close. So I want to just tell you a scary story tonight to maybe encourage you a little bit to think, hey, it could be worse, and it has been. So Judges chapter 19. Look at this one. All right? This is a good one. I'm going to read. Let's just read together. Let's spend some time in the Bible. Let me look at what time it is. 5:12. I don't want to go too long. So we'll jump ahead at some points, but I want to get the scary parts in. All right, Judges chapter 19, verse 1 beginning. Follow with me if you will. I want to be close to this mic, so I'm going to hold my Bible up here. And it came to pass, I'm going to do a lot of reading, so I'd encourage you to open your Bible and follow along unless you just love hearing me read. Judges chapter 19, verse 1. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that's a theme throughout Judges, and that would be a scary time. The leadership is lacking, and so the people will make bad decisions. A common theme in the world at all times. Well, here it was. And it came to pass when there was no king in Israel that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine, now there is a lot to this story. I love the details. Pay attention to the details, okay? So, but his concubine, this is verse 2, played the harlot against him and went away from him to his father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there for 4 months. Okay, so this is this guy's concubine. She has left him, played the harlot. She's been sleeping with other men, all this kind of stuff. And now she's at her dad's house. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. Good guy. Good guy. He's going to go, even though she's been left him for months and for other men and sleeping around and stuff like that, he is going to go and get her back. Okay? Having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. So he went to go get his concubine, his wife. She'll be said to be his wife at times too. Went to go get her, okay? She was back at her dad's house. She had left her husband for a while, been sleeping around. Now she's back at her dad's house. He goes to get her, and he lodges there for a few days, staying with his father-in-law, sorry. All right, verse 5. Then it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning. So this is the 4th day he's been staying with his father-in-law. And he stood to depart, but the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread and afterward go your way. So he says, don't go yet. You got to get some food. You don't want to leave on an empty stomach, long trip, and then you can go. So they sat down, verse 6, and the two of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged again. So every time the guy tries to leave, the father-in-law has a reason for him to stay. No, you're hungry now. Stay. No, it's late. Stay. So he stays for several days. Verse 8. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, but the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. And when the man stood to depart, look at the details. It's over and over again. There's reasons this is in here. There's so many things not in the Bible, so if it's in here and it's detailed like this, it's for a reason. God wants us to know these details. So let's read them. Verse 9. So when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day's now drawing toward evening. Spend the night. You're catching a theme. So the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow go your way early so that you may go home. Well, the guy, he's getting the hint. He's like, this guy's just going to keep having excuses for me to stay. He don't want his daughter to leave. Eventually, he's just going to go. However, and this is it, verse 10. However, the man was not willing to spend that night. He said, this is it. We got to get out of here. So he rose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, come, please, let us turn aside unto this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. So they've left the father-in-law's house, and they're starting to travel back. And the servant, we got to find us a place to stay. We don't need to be out traveling through the night. We got to stop somewhere and lodge. But his master said to him, verse 12, we will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah. So he didn't want to stop at that place because it wasn't Israelites. It was foreigners. And so he wanted to keep going a little bit further. So he said to his servant, come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah. And they passed by and went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So it started getting dark, and they were close to Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. Now, remember, this is Judges. This is not long after they've conquered the land. Joshua's led them into the promised land. They've conquered the promised land. They've identified the areas where they're going to live. And you've got the 12 tribes, and they've taken their lands. And so Bethlehem was one of those, obviously, and this is where they're at. Benjamin is one of those, and this is where they're at. So they turned aside to go there, to go in to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. What they would do, they didn't really have like hotels like we have today where you'd go and stay a lot of times. They would have some places that were somewhat like that, were known places that were open to travelers. But for the most part, people would just be welcomed into people's houses. If you were going through town, you would see somebody who you wouldn't recognize. This person's not from around here. We haven't seen these people before. They'd be in places that were in the common square area, and they'd say, hey, you get to talking to them. They're friendly. They talk to people. You got a place that will come stay with us tonight. And they would host them, and they would feed them, and they would let them stay at their house. Well, nobody did that. They stood in the square and waited, and nobody invited them in. So they're everybody's going into their homes now, and they're kind of just left out there on the street. Verse 16. Just then, an old man came in from his work in the field at evening, who also was from the mountains of Ephraim. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city, and the old man said, "Where are you going? And where do you come from?" It would be obvious that they were sticking out. They didn't belong there. They wouldn't normally be there. So the guy notices them and says, "Hey, what are y'all doing here?" I appreciate it at times. We were walking around Chicago this week, and it was obvious, from my accent and things like that, and the way I was walking around looking at the buildings, the locals aren't doing this. It was obvious that I wasn't from around there, and so people, "Where are you from?" They'd ask, and so it was obvious by the way I was acting that I wasn't living in Chicago, and so the same for these people. Verse 18. So he said to them, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I am going to the house of the Lord, but there is no one who will take me into his house. Although we have both straw and fodder." So he said, nobody's invited us in. Even though we have straw and fodder we've got food and we've got what we need for our donkeys, our animals. We have bread and wine for ourselves, for our female servant, and for the young man who is with us, our servant. There's no lack of anything. So nobody's invited us in, even though we have everything we need. We don't need any, Sometimes people might be like, "Well, I'd invite you over, but I don't have any food for you. I don't have anything to take care of you." He said, we don't even need that. We just need a safe place to stay. But yet nobody has invited us in. Verse 20. The story's about to get scary. Verse 20. Good horror stories, they kind of tease you for a while, You know how it is. They don't just jump out at you right at the beginning and start killing people. They tease you for a little while. They set it up. You think the music starts to get set up. You think it's going to be bad, and a little cat runs across, and you're like, "Oh, that cat scared me," And it's not even anything scary at all. Well, that's kind of what this story's been doing. It's been setting it up. All these details has been setting it up. You got this old man from the mountains. This would be a really good, spooky story. This old man from the mountains is going to help them. The old man from the mountains says, "Peace be with you," verse 20. "However, let all your needs be my responsibility. I know you got what you need, but just keep what you got. I got stuff at the house. You can come stay with me. I'll take care of you. Only do not spend the night in the open square. Don't stay out here in the street. Don't stay out here and squeak." So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. That was like when I was walking around my old neighborhood. I told some in my class this morning. And we talked to several people, the security guard at the school where I used to go and things like that, and they all had the same thing to say. "Don't walk around here at night," and was telling us about all the crime and stuff like that, warning us about how dangerous it is. That's what this guy's doing for them. Verse 22. Mine says, I have a heading starting here. It says Gibeah's crime. That's what mine calls it. Does anybody else have a different heading? Oh, that's fine. Anybody else have a different heading? Mine says Gibeah's crime. Does anybody have anything? No? Too scared to talk. Maybe it's the same. Verse 22. As they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, sons of Belial, as it's literally put, surrounded the house and beat on the door. Now, this is going to sound familiar to a story that you've heard before. Sodom and Gomorrah story. It's going to sound familiar to that one, but this is not that story. This is a different one. Suddenly, certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house, beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally." Is the word that mine has here with an exclamation point. Verse 23. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage. Now, if you're a news watcher, many of you in here are. I am not. I will admit. I'm not a news watcher because I want to be happy. I want to be happy. I'm normally a positive guy. And I find that the days that I'm a news watcher, I struggle with that. So I don't watch much of the news. But if you are a news watcher, You are worried right now. You know, you're thinking, this is getting bad. I dare say that none of us have had anything like this happen to us or about what is about to transpire. Do not commit this outrage, the old man says, as they're banging on his house trying to get this guy who's come in. Verse 24, look. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this lesson is because I want us to just be bewildered with the thought process and the rationale that's going on here. I would hope that as bad as we think it is, we would at least not come to these kinds of conclusions and think this is the way to solve things. Because when he has these visitors in his house, and these men of the streets, these Benjamites, these men of the city come and try to say, hey, give this guy to us because we want to, treat him sexually, whatever they were wanting to do to this guy, carnally, as the passage says here. The old man goes out the house and says, don't do that, he's my guest. Here's what you do. Look, here is my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Guys, this is horrible stuff. Humble them and do with them as you please. Could you imagine saying that about your daughter to anybody? But to this man, don't do such a vile thing. I'm going to tell you, we live in a much better time. And it's just getting started, people. When you start watching the news again this week and you start getting worried and thinking, man, the world is just falling apart. This is the end. How could it get worse? It can get worse and has been. See, the gospel is here. Some people might say, well, what's different? Jesus. Jesus had not been an example for these people at this time. They didn't have that. We do. Okay? Let me offer you up my virgin daughter and this man's concubine and bring them out to you. Humble them and do with them as you please, but don't do any such vile thing with this man. Verse 25, but the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. Verse 26. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where his master was till it was light. So these awful men abused this man's concubine, his wife, all night long. And then in the morning, she stumbles onto his front steps. Verse 27, this story infuriates me. Verse 27, when her master arose in the morning and opened the door of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine. I mean, look at the disinterest, I don't even understand. I'm so thankful I don't live at this time. He's leaving the house of this old man, and he walks out to go his way, and there is his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. She's laying there, and her hands are on the steps of the door. And look at this. I know there's lots of details left out, but there's a lot of details here. And the insensitivity of this story, the disrespect for women, I mean, it's just horrible. Look at what he says. And he says to her, she has been abused by these men all night long because they wanted him instead for some whatever reason. And when he walks out the door, there she is laying there on the foot of the door. And he says, get up and let's go. Hey, get up and let's go. We need to go home. But there was no answer. No wonder. She's about dead. So he lifted her up. I'm thankful to hear he at least did that. At least helped her up. So he lifted her up onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. So he puts her on his donkey, and they head up to his house. And look at this, verse 29. When he entered his house, he took a knife. I told y'all this is a horror story right here. When he entered his house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine, and he cut her into 12 pieces. And sent her throughout all Israel. What is going on? I mean, if somebody wrote this script and said, we're going to make this a movie, people would be like, man, this is sick. Ain't nobody watching this. I mean, this is messed up. It's like, well, it's actually just Judges 19. I mean, if we're being honest, just kind of stole it from the Bible. And this ain't some made-up story. This happened, y'all. So when you watch the news and you think, man, our kids, I wish raising our kids at a time when it's just, no, it could be a lot worse. Could you imagine raising your kids at a time when the friend at school you find out was offered to a bunch of men in the street for the night? That's a rough time to live. So he gets home and he cuts his concubine up into 12 pieces and just mails her all over Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. They said, man, even this is messed up for today. I mean, we ain't seen nothing like this. What is going on? Who would cut up somebody and just send body parts all over the place? What is the message of that? Now, what's our time? Because it ain't over. All right. I'm going to paraphrase chapter 20 for you. And then we're going to skip on to chapter 21. Chapter 20 basically is the Israelites say, we got to do something about the tribe of Benjamin. They're out of control. We got to do something about them. So they decide to go to war with the tribe of Benjamin. So all of Israel, remember, the 12 tribes have gone in and they've taken over the promised land and they've divided it up. And you've got this section that belongs to Benjamin. It was a small section of land, but they had a section of land. It was close to Jerusalem. This is where they were passing through when all this terrible stuff happened. Those men of Benjamin were the ones who did this. And so they're like, what do we got to do? We got to do something about those guys. We got to make a point that this stuff ain't going to happen. You can't be doing this. So they went to Benjamin, the people of Benjamin, and they said, send us these men. I'm paraphrasing this chapter so we don't have to read it all. Send us these men so we can kill them and make a point that y'all cannot be doing this. This is awful. Okay? And the Benjamin people said, no, we're not giving up our people. We'd rather fight. And so they had a battle. Israel goes to battle with their own people, the people of Benjamin. And and this war is detailed in this, and I will tell you that they have to fight several times. And after several attempts, they finally utterly almost destroy Benjamin, till there's just a few hundred men left in Benjamin. Kill men, women, and children, kill all the women, all the kids, and just have a few men left. And there's this small remnant of Benjamin left. And they realize that there's just this small remnant of Benjamin left. And so they're like, well, we can't just totally wipe one of the tribes, one of the 12 promised tribes off the map. And so they start to think, we got to do something. We can't just wipe them all off. So chapter 21, that's where we pick up. Now, the men of Israel had sworn an oath to Mizpah, saying, none of us, I'm in Judges chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. Now the men of Israel had sworn an oath unto Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughters to Benjamin as a wife. One of the things they decided is, we're not letting any of our wives marry any of these guys. That's part of the punishment to Benjamin. I don't want my wife marrying a Benjamite. So that was part of it. But then they realized, well, that's a problem because we've done killed all the women. They literally went in and killed every woman, every child of Benjamin, thousands of them. All they had was a few hundred men left. And they're like, well, they don't have any women to marry, so somebody's got to marry them. So look at the conclusion they come to. This is crazy to me, but then the people came in the house of God and remained there before God till evening, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly, and they said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel? We're literally about to wipe out a whole tribe, the Benjamites, right off the bat, right off the face of the earth. And so they're remorseful. They're trying to figure out what to do to solve this problem. Verse 4, you're probably like me, and you're thinking, what is going on with this story? I haven't never heard that. What is, yeah. Verse 4. So it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. The children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with the assembly to the Lord? So here's their conclusion. They're trying to decide, what are we going to do? Because there's this group of like 400 or so men that are from Benjamin. That's all that's left. We've killed every woman. We've killed every kid. There's like these 400 men that ran, and now they're up in this fortified place, and we've told them we're not going to kill them because we want Benjamites left. We don't want to wipe Benjamin off the face of the earth. But now they're like, well, how are we going to have any, offspring? How are we going to continue? We don't have any women. And so here's the conclusion they come to. They say, who's not at the meeting? You ever been in one of those meetings? Philip, this is the way they run oftentimes. I love these meetings where you're in a meeting, we're in the meeting here with the elders and deacons, and they're like, we got this new job that we want to give somebody. Well, who's not at the meeting? Be like, well, Philip's not at the meeting. Well, there you go. That's the perfect person. He's going to be our new, deacon over whatever, So that's the person that gets this job. Well, that's kind of how they do it. Because they're like, who's going to be the wife to these Benjamites? Because we've all made an agreement none of us want to marry them. We don't want to send any of our daughters to marry them. So they say, who's not at the meeting? Who did not come and help in this fight? Who didn't help? Who didn't show up when we called for these men, a certain number of men from each tribe to help in this battle? Who didn't send people to help? For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to the Lord of Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the children of Israel grieved for Benjamin their brother, this is verse 6, and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters as wives? What are we going to do? Verse 8, and they said, what one is there from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Mizpah to the Lord? What's the group that didn't show up to fight when we told everybody to send people to fight? And in fact, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. They were looking around and they're like, well, there's nobody from Jabesh Gilead that came. Well, there you go. They ain't got nobody here, so they're the ones that are going to marry these Benjamites. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent out there 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male, every woman who has known a man intimately. Look at this. I was watching some show recently, and they were talking about the dangers of social media and our phones and the times that we spend looking at our screens and how it affects the brain. And kids, earlier at age, they start looking at their phones. Ruby and Owen are fighting over trying to get an iPad and look at it today. And all we're trying to do is just get them to go outside and play. And there's a lot of concern about that. And polls, they were showing polls about people saying, and they were saying that parents now believe that this is the most difficult time to raise kids because of the battle over phones and social media. Owen's 12, and he's like, when am I going to get a phone? Literally, we were on the way to church this morning, and he showed us this Gab phone that his friends got, who you can only call on that phone. He's like, I got to have that. And I'm like, when do you need to call me that you ain't around somebody that's got a phone, We're just trying to delay it as long as we possibly can. With our girls, they were not allowed to have their phone in their room. you were on your phone, it had to be in the living room. Couldn't take your phone to your room at night. Man, that was the end of the world, they thought, All my friends get to take their phone, we always think that it's the worst, Things can't we always think that poll. Now's the worst time to raise kids. This was a worse time to raise kids. Social media is bad, yes. But God's army's going in and wiping out and killing every man, woman, and child because they didn't come fight in a war. That's bad. These are the conclusions that people come to when they don't have wisdom and leadership. Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. Verse 11, and this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male, every woman who has known a man intimately. If they're not a virgin and they're a woman, they're dead. So I guess you got to go up and ask them. I don't know. If they're around that age, I don't know how they decided that. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately. They killed all the others. And they brought them to the camp of Shiloh, which is at the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the children of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon, the men who were left that were hiding, and announced peace to them. They said, guys, we're done fighting you guys. And here's what we've got is like a gift. We've got these 400 young virgin girls we killed all their family, killed their parents, killed their brothers. They're prisoners of war, basically, these young virgin girls, and now they're your prize. I mean, the bloodshed, the lack of respect for human life. Verse 14. So Benjamin came back at that time, and they gave them the women who they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and yet they had not found enough for them. They had 400 women that were virgins that they had found, that they had not killed. But there was more men than that. So they needed some more women. So they had to figure out what they were going to do, because none of them wanted to give them their daughters. They couldn't be outsiders. They had to be Jews. So verse 15, and the people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a void in the tribes of Israel. I love how they say it's the Lord. Verse 16, then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for the wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed? Here's the conclusion they came to. Look at this. My guess is you've never seen this before. I had not till fairly recently. Look at this. This is the conclusion they came to for the rest of the men who didn't have wives. Verse 17, and they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. We've got to find somebody to give them wives so that they can continue this tribe, because we killed all their wives that they had. However, verse 18, we cannot give them wives from our daughters. We don't want them to have ours. So what are we going to do? For the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, cursed be those who give a wife to Jew. We promised we wouldn't do it, so we can't do that. We'd rather just kill people than break that promise. So here we go. Then they said, in fact, they said, I'll tell you what, there's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh. They just came up with this idea. You know what? There's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, the south of Lebanon. So you remember that feast that they have, Oktoberfest up in St. Florian? You remember that? It's kind of like that. Once a year they have that big fest. Well, I said, you remember that? Yeah, I remember that. Well, therefore, they said, here's what you do. They instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, go, lie in wait in the vineyards. Go around in the vineyards around this feast, because the young women are going to be dancing during the feast. This is what they do. They have this big dance. So you guys go and lie in the fields, in the vineyards, hide in the corn stalks and stuff like that, while they're dancing, and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, come out from the vineyards and catch a wife. They're going to play a game called Catch a Wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, then go to the land of Benjamin. Then it shall be, verse 22, when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, because they might come and complain about that their daughters are out there dancing during this festival and people are just jumping out of the woods, catching these girls and taking them for wives. And they said, when their fathers or their brothers come to complain, we'll say to them, be kind to them for our sakes, because we didn't take a wife for any of them in the war. We killed all the women in the war. For it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time. Make yourself guilty of your oath. So this is kind of a way to pay back for what we did by killing their wives. So it's okay. Just let them, if they're able to grab your daughter and catch her during this dance, then just let them have her. Verse 23, and the children of Benjamin did so. They took enough wives for their number from those who danced, who they caught. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. So the children of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. They went out from there, every man to his inheritance. And the last verse sums it all up. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everybody did that was right in their own eyes. It can be worse. Halloween time, you like a good scary story? The Bible is packed with scary stories. As I was thinking about, which story to choose and stuff like that, I was thinking, man, we could do a whole series on. But that wouldn't be very fun, would it? Could you imagine sitting and listening to a whole series of that? Be like, man, this is depressing. But I hope that as you listen to that, you get a couple things out of that. Number one is when the world looks dark to you at times, just remember God is in it. Jesus is the example for us today. They didn't have that example to look to then. We have the ultimate example of how to respond. And no, not everybody is going to respond that way, but he has changed the world for the better. I can promise you that. It will never get like that. Why? Because the good that he exemplified in his life stands up now. And at times when world powers and people have tried to do some things like that, even though that's seriously messed up stuff, when they have tried to do some things like that, good has stood up. And it will continue to do that. Jesus is the ultimate example for that. I was hearing somebody the other day mention this, and this is kind of the way I'll close. I know it's kind of a total 180 on this, but I'm going to end it with this. Because I thought it was really good. I was listening to somebody the other day say this. He said, if I told you I was going to give you $1 million right now, would you take it? Would you be grateful? And of course, the audience was like, absolutely. God, whatever. Thank you, man. That's awesome. He said, what if I told you I'd give you $1 million, but that you wouldn't wake up tomorrow? Would you take it? Well, obviously not a single person was like, yeah, I'd like to have $1 million right now, but knowing that part of that deal is I won't wake up tomorrow, none of us would take that deal. We'd all be like, no. I'm not taking $1 million to not wake up. You couldn't give me $1 billion. There's no amount of money you could give me if it meant I wouldn't wake up tomorrow. He said, well, then why don't you wake up tomorrow like it's worth $1 million? Because you just said you wouldn't take $1 million in exchange to wake up tomorrow, but yet tomorrow we'll wake up and we'll grumble because we got to get ready for school or we got to get ready for work. I'll say that tomorrow. I'll be like, oh, it's Monday. I wouldn't have traded $1 million for it. I am so thankful that I can read about those stories, but I am not living through days like that. I'm thankful that we have a much greater sense of appreciation and respect for women, for people, for the lives of others. We see individuals differently than us, and I mean, even our enemies. That's my prayer. That's what Jesus said. That's the beauty of that. Jesus didn't look at his enemy and say, let's go kill that guy, even though he could have. I thought about that this morning. I was like, when Jesus came to earth, when I was thinking about what to do for the Lord's Supper this morning, I was like, my mind always goes back to that idea. When Jesus came to this earth, he humbled himself. That's what Ty talked about this morning. He humbled himself and took the form of a servant. Jesus could have taken the form of anybody. Think about that. He could have looked at the Father and said, you know that family there that's super, super rich and living it up? That's the family I want to be born into. And justified it probably. Thought, man, if I have all this money and all this power and influence, think of what good I can do. Think of how quickly I can change the world. Because we think that's what we need, right? We need power and influence and money, and that's how we'll change the world. Jesus proved to us that that's not how you do it. By loving everybody, even the people who don't love you back. That is tough. That today is the example. That was not the example in those stories. So I hope if you get something from it tonight. We got a little spooky story tonight for Halloween time, getting us ready, but ultimately we want to remember that Jesus is the great example. Maybe you're here tonight and you're not a member of the church. You need prayers. Maybe you've been letting the news and the world scare you to death and you just need peace that comes from God to say, hey, God's got this. And Jesus is the ultimate example. And that's what I'm going to live for and like. And if you need prayers and help you with that, won't you come as we stand and sing?